So a warm welcome to everybody. My name's Linda Amrane-Cooper and I'm Director of the Centre for Online and Distance Education. And today's webinar, we'll be looking at inclusive employability approaches through the toolkit that we developed. So I'm going to take you through who we are and hand over to my co-presenters for this. But it's lovely to welcome you here, and I can see from all of the names, many of whom I recognise, that we've got colleagues from across the UK and internationally. So that's fantastic. This is a real opportunity to share perspectives on employability, curriculum and inclusive practice. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to start with the slides now and take us through the first or one or two slides. We didn't test if it was working for me. Ah, yes, it is working for me. So I'm Linda Amrane-Cooper. I'm Director of Academic Practice at the University of London, and I lead the Centre for Online and Distance Education. Aranee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Aranee Manoharen. I am Senior Associate Director for Careers and Employability at King's College London, and also ACCAS Board Director for Social Mobility, Widened Participation and Regional Inequality, and also kind of a partner as part of this project.
Thanks, Aranee. Gemma.
Hi everyone, I'm Gemma Kenyon. I'm the Director of Careers and Employability at City University of London, and I'm also an ACCAS Board Director, and my specialism is integrating employability.
Brilliant. And we've got technical support from Matt, and there are several CODE fellows, Centre for Online and Distance Education fellows in the audience. And so if we interact via chat, I'm confident that people will respond, and we'll try and respond as we go through to the chat. Thank you very much. Okay, over to you, Gemma. Why inclusive employability and why does it matter in the curriculum?
Thanks, Aranee. So we're going to run through what we've been doing on this project, but before we get into that, we thought we'd take a bit of a step back and go, why did we do it? You know, why have we been doing this work? Why is it important? And I'm, conscious that it's great to see a global audience today. So I'm going to particularly give a bit of a sense into what's happening in the UK higher education sector. So in terms of starting with the good news, so we've been working as a sector in higher education in the UK to widen participation, so to allow as many students as possible who ordinarily would have or historically would have faced barriers to getting into higher education and still do face barriers to getting into higher education, to mitigate against those barriers and enable them to succeed and access higher education. So and that's obviously, we're not unique in that's many other countries have also been having major successes in that, which is fantastic. So the first bit of good news is that we already have a much more diverse student population than we have historically in the UK. However, as careers and employability professionals, the challenge that we still face is that those demographic factors are still determining their success in the labour market, even when educational variables are controlled. So even when we take into account factors such as social background, ethnicity, gender, these factors are still having an impact on the success of our graduates in the labour market, even when you control for their educational attainment, the university they went to, etc. And there is research to demonstrate that that's the case. We know that students from less resourced backgrounds face barriers to engaging in extracurricular employability activities, and it's certainly in the UK traditionally that's how universities have expected students to develop their employability, through engaging in these extracurricular activities. But we know anyone who spends any time thinking about this would realise that students from those less resourced backgrounds are going to face barriers to meaningfully being able to participate in those activities. So that could be that they're working in part-time jobs that take up their time. It could be they're carers for their members of their family. It could be they have long commutes. All of these things are factors, which means that they just have less time. They're less available for those extracurricular activities. So we know that there are structural inequities in the labour market as well. We know that obviously higher education is a microcosm of society, and we know that those structural inequities still exist, unfortunately, in terms of discrimination and other factors. So that's the sort of the challenge, if you like. But the positivity is that curriculum reaches all of the students, and we see the curriculum as an opportunity to reach those who otherwise wouldn't be able to engage in those extracurricular activities. If it's engaging, if it's in the curriculum, it really levels the playing field and enables those students to access that learning and participate alongside their peers. But it's absolutely critical that that embedded employability education in the curriculum is designed with inclusivity in mind, because otherwise we are just losing an opportunity to make sure that all of our students can benefit equally from their education once it's there in the curriculum. So as I said in the introduction, my specialism is that I'm the Integrated Employability Director for ADCAS, which means that my big focus is how do we embed employability in the curriculum. Obviously, inclusivity is absolutely central to that. There's no point doing it if it's not going to be inclusive, because the students that we need to benefit the most will not benefit as much as they ordinarily, or as much as they could do. And up until now, what we saw when the call came out for this funding was that we felt at the time that it was a neglected part of the inclusivity conversation. So when there was a look at what had already been done, employability education specifically within the inclusivity agenda had been a neglected part of the dialogue in the sector, and we wanted to fill that gap, and that's what we've done with the production of this toolkit. Next slide, please, Linda. And so I've said a bit about kind of what's happening specifically in HE, and kind of maybe some of the broader sector. Obviously, we are affected by the UK policy landscape as well, and there are a number of factors driving this agenda for UK higher education institutions. And you can see there some headings which are representing the complexity of what we have in UK HE at the moment, that's making policymakers and people in universities think about the importance of this work and really move it up the institutional agenda at a time when, let's be honest, there are lots of things on that agenda, but this is very firmly at the top. So just starting at the top there, we've got the skills agenda. So we have a new government that's come in, and that kind of links as well to the regional economic development at the bottom there. This kind of a big push on wanting to drive the UK economy, recognising that skills is going to be a really important part of that, and the changing labour market and the importance of equipping entrance to the labour market and throughout lifelong learning as well, to have those skills to be able to pivot to different career areas and roles as they come up. Then we've got in orange there the graduate outcomes. So graduate outcomes continues to be a big focus for UK higher education. All UK universities have to produce metrics about what percentage of their graduates are in professional level work or study 15 months after graduation. That's what we call the Graduate Outcomes Survey. And that data feeds into league tables. And so it very much is part of our narrative in the UK in terms of how successful is your institution being. It's part of those success metrics. And we also use that data, that graduate outcomes data, in the B3 condition that you can see there. So we have a regulator now called the Office for Students. And one of the things that they've brought in is the B3 condition. So this is an expectation that there's a baseline threshold of all of your graduates should be getting into professional level work or study. And if you're not meeting that lower threshold, then potentially you could be investigated by our regulator, the Office for Students. And the potential consequences of that is that your course could be closed down theoretically if it was deemed that you were in breach of that condition. So there is definitely a kind of a pressure as well as the kind of excellence of the league tables and wanting to stand out. There's also that kind of lower threshold as well, a kind of stick approach, if you like, of you have to meet that B3 condition according to the Office for Students. We also want to show our excellence. So the Office for Students also have the Teaching Excellence Framework. So this is giving opportunities to institutions to provide an explanation of how we're supporting the outcomes of our students, and graduate outcomes features in that as a data set, but also there's an important emphasis based on the narrative. So what kind of strategies do we as UK higher educations have in supporting the outcomes of our students, including those in the labour market, and that is rated gold, silver and bronze. So there's kind of, again, that external reputational importance of your institution wanting to get high scores in the TEF. And Access and participation plans are increasingly important, and I think this particularly links into some of the agenda that's coming through the new government as well. Access and participation plans in the UK are around how we support our students from less advantaged backgrounds, and all institutions have targets for reducing gaps. So every institution in the UK will have a gap of some kind, between in terms of the demographic factors of some certain communities of students when they get out into the labour market and how they're faring in that proportion of that's getting into professional level work or study. And the Office for Students are very keen and in fact insisting on institutions trying to close those gaps as quickly as we can, and setting targets around that. Thank you. Next slide, Linda. And I will hand over to Aranee. Or is it not Aranee?
I think it might be me doing this one. So thanks, Gemma. You've really set the kind of context as to why the toolkit was important and why it was important to focus on inclusivity, and why important to focus on building the employability and careers within the curriculum, as it were. So what we wanted to do was just ask you to have a little think about the barriers that students face in developing their employability in your context. So really thinking about particularly students from disadvantaged backgrounds in your context, what are the barriers to helping them support and develop their employability? So we're going to use a Mentimeter. You can point at the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and type in the code number there. I'll just give people a moment to do that, and then I'll swap out to show you some of the feedback that's coming in. We're getting lots of really good thoughts here. Lack of confidence, self-esteem, financial circumstances, competitive housing prices prevent students lacking time. So confidence, financial factors, time are coming across a lot here, which is really interesting. Prejudice. Students not appreciating the value of having employability skills. These are some really important things here. Limited networks and social capital, absolutely. Questions about where internships are, so barriers to accessing internships, which might be financial pressures, the location of the internship, and placements. The need to be bringing in an income to support the family. Multiple commitments, language, role models. Yeah. Not prepared for work because they've had limited work preparation built into their curriculum. Excellent. So we've got some really helpful thoughts here. I don't know, Aranee or Gemma, whether you wanted to comment on any of these. I think these are the things we built the toolkit for, really, aren't they?
Go ahead, Aranee.
Yeah, absolutely. So lack of social capital, cultural capital, how you can support students to cultivate the right types of networks that will support them in this space. how do you help them cultivate those skills and capabilities in an environment where they've got loads to juggle? So that multiple priority piece is a really important one. When they do have really important responsibilities to their family or loved ones. So all of these things were taken into consideration. We're going to speak a little bit later on as well around how we can understand these challenges, but also then kind of think about what that means for our work in the curriculum as well.
Thanks very much. And we will share the outcomes from the Mentimeter as well. We can include that in the report and the video so people have an opportunity to have a look at that. I'm going to just pop us back into the presentation now, if that's okay. So, Gemma, you're going to talk a little bit about how we developed the toolkit.
Thanks, Linda. So thinking about all of the great things that we just heard there, we obviously felt we wanted to develop the toolkit. So that's really great to hear those ideas, because they absolutely reinforce the importance of this work and why we did it. So some of you might remember back in 23-24, the QAA put out a call for what they call collaborative enhancement projects. So all institutions were invited to bid for a small pot of money. I think it was £10,000 to do a piece of work which would help move the dial on something that was important in the education space. And we came together, so City, King's and the University of London came together in a collaboration to produce this toolkit. And this was, we were specifically looking at support inclusive employability education in the curriculum, as we said before, because we felt that was a real gap in what was provided in the sector. And we felt that we could add some meaningful dialogue to help move the sector on in how we were thinking about some of these matters. And as we said before in our introductions, the project team brought together expertise in a number of different areas. So as we said before, we across our project team, we had expertise both in terms of curriculum design and inclusivity, so we feel we've had a good group of people looking at this. And a really important point from this is that we really feel that the toolkit is for all educators. So obviously, you know, I'm a professional services member of staff. I manage a team of which the vast majority of them teach in the curriculum on professional service contracts. We know that academics are also doing a really important work in this area. So we don't feel that there's a distinction to be made in terms of using this toolkit. It's about educators and it's about professional service staff and academics. It was really important to us when we were putting this toolkit together that it'd be useful for both of those categories of staff. It doesn't matter what kind of background you're coming to with this. And again, another really important factor that drove how we designed the toolkit was making it dual purpose. So we recognised that there were two things to it where we felt that we could really help move the dial. The first was making specific employability modules more inclusive. So we recognised that some institutions are putting explicit employability modules in the curriculum. Obviously, City was one of them. And we wanted to produce tools which would help those educators when teaching those modules to make that teaching content more inclusive. But we also recognise that not every institution is in that space. And we also wanted the toolkit to be effective in discipline-specific modules that aren't explicitly about employability skills. So it is enabling all students to develop, regardless of background, to develop those employability skills in discipline-specific modules as well as employability-specific modules. So wherever kind of camp you're kind of coming to for this webinar, whether you're thinking about employability-specific modules or discipline-specific modules, I hope in the toolkit you find something that's useful for you, because that's definitely something we kept in mind. And we also recognise that there's a stage to this. So I'm going to show you the toolkit in a minute, but you'll see that we've categorised the resources into prepare, deliver and evaluate, because we recognise that that's three useful stages when you're doing this work. And so we organise the resources in that way. And what we've come to at the end of it is a free, openly available resource, which is available online for everybody to use. So Linda, if you want to stop sharing, I will attempt to go to the site and I'll show everyone around. All right, so you can see here, so this is the site. And in fact, if Linda or Aranee, if you pop the link in the chat for everybody so they've got it to hand, then that would be appreciated. So it's hosted on the University of London website, and I will pop the link in the chat here. So as just to echo that point, it's a freely available resource available online. And you can see here what you come to on the front page, the landing page, are these three categories. So the prepare, deliver, and evaluate. Those three categories that have different resources in them. And we've got here the labels, the logos of our various institutions that have been involved in the project, and a brief explanation of what are we doing. And if you do want to, if it's helpful, if you're kind of after this, maybe showing other people around the toolkit, there's a video down here that takes you through it as well if colleagues have missed this webinar. So I'm going to click in prepare. And you can see here what it takes you to is a whole set of resources that really are around how do you conceptualize, how do you start doing this work? When you're at the curriculum design phase, how do you approach your process of curriculum design with inclusivity in mind? So what you have here are various resources to help you think about that inclusivity point at the point of designing curricula. And as I said, that could be specific employability curricula, or it could be discipline-specific curricula. So there's a really useful PDF here, which goes through different things that you might want to think about, different models and things of different approaches to think about. Let me go back to.
It's just on the other tab, Gemma.
Let's see. No, that's not it. Okay, let me just go back to. Yeah, great, lovely. So you can see there are some different resources. So another thing that we have down here at the bottom of the prepare section are further resources. So we've got resources here around understanding barriers to employability development. So you've got a PDF there. We also recognise, going back to that point about the toolkit being useful for all different types of educators. So if you are a professional services member of staff thinking about working with academics in this work, we've got some resources there about maybe things to think about in terms of effective collaboration with academics. And likewise, if you are an academic thinking about how you might collaborate with your career service, you've got a resource there about how to work effectively with your career service. And then we've got one here about learning outcomes, which are really important. So that's all about the curriculum design phase. And then we've got a whole category of resources here, which are around the actual delivery of education in the classroom, whether that's physical or virtual. And we divided this up into different types of activities that you might be doing. So we have some set resources here about auditing your context. So auditing what you're already doing. So understanding what is already there and identifying how you could build on that. Then we've got different types of activities that you might be doing with students. So we've got resources here around student participation and feedback. So that might be different activities that you might be doing. And an important point is, so these were developed by educators at City, these deliver resources who are teaching modules in the curriculum. So, developed by practitioners and tested with practitioners, but we'll come on to that a bit later. Then we have a category here on peer-assisted learning. So how do you create that space for students to learn from each other? And there's various different examples here of different activities that you could do where students are doing activities that have inclusivity at the heart of them and learning from each other. And you can see here, just from flicking through, there's a lot of it. So I think that's the other thing I'd encourage you to delve through and pick something that's going to be something that's relevant to you. Then there's a category of resources here around real world learning. So how are you bringing employers into the education that you're delivering and alumni? So there's different resources here about how you can involve them, how you can get work-based learning in. So you can see here, there's lots here.
Gemma, is it worth mentioning that if you sort of click on one of these resources, it's got various sections that help you to prepare, identify how you might deliver that particular toolkit item, etc.
That's true. Yeah. So I'll show you one as an example. So this one is about researching organizations. So we had because we recognized when we were designing the toolkit that it was always going to be quite a comprehensive set of resources. We certainly aspired for it to be quite a comprehensive set of resources, and we wanted it to be easy to navigate. So we have got a standard template for all of these resources. So you can see here that what we do is we go through and we provide a summary around what the tool is and what kind of learning outcomes would be relevant for this tool when you're thinking about whether it might be relevant for you. And we also here have a handy box to help you think about what kind of teaching delivery is it most relevant for. So obviously you can see here, this tool is relevant in a lot of different scenarios apart from asynchronous learning, but we have some that are more relevant for small group cohorts or large group, or you'd only want to do it in person, etc. We've produced a list of resources that you'd need to deliver this activity and how you'd want to prepare in advance. If there's any prerequisites before you do this activity. So some of our activities, because of the nature of them, it is useful to have done an activity beforehand. So if that's the case, we flag it in here. So you can see here for this particular one, the educator is saying, it'd be useful to have done the creating psychologically safe spaces activity before you do this one. And then you've got a kind of a step-by-step guide of how you would do this activity in your classroom environment. So it's not prescriptive in terms of, we recognize that some of the, you might have an hour, you might have 30 minutes, you might be doing it online, you might be doing it in person. So this isn't meant to be a prescriptive description, but it's meant to essentially give you a kind of a rough sense of how you might run this activity with students. So you can see here some basic information and then how you would actually get the students involved. So you can see here that this activity is also all about researching organizations. So, getting them into groups and looking at different sources about how they can research the inclusivity dimensions of different resource employers. And then you've got here at the end some links to different resources that you could share with students as well. So I hope that's helpful as a way of just to kind of break that down a little bit more. And then what we've done is the final section is evaluate. So this contains information about how we evaluated the tools. So you can see here information that from our evaluation of using these resources, because as I mentioned before, we tested them with students and you can see here the details of what our findings were, but also how we would like you to evaluate these assets yourselves. So we really want this resource to be a live resource that you utilize, that's utilized in educational practice and that continues to evolve. And for that, we'd love you to provide feedback about how you're finding some of these activities and inputting. So you can see here there's some links for users as well, because we want to keep gathering that information. And you can see here we also have some resources. So if obviously evaluating our practice is an important part of what we do. So they can see here some prompts that you might want to use if you're thinking about trying out some of these tools. You'd like to evaluate your practice. We have provided some resources to help you do that as well.
Aranee,
yeah.
So I think moving over to you, and you're going to give us some more information on the deliver section and the approaches that people can use to prepare.
Yes, we're going to delve into the toolkit a bit, folks. Hopefully you can see this screen here. And yeah, we're going to look at the prepare section of the toolkit. And that's because this is probably the part of the toolkit that pretty much all universities, whatever your context, can actually kind of utilize and engage with, because it's really all around how we can try to approach curriculum design. Now, when Gemma was talking about the toolkit, she was talking about employability education, but the prepare part of the toolkit is really about about teaching and learning and curriculum design. So I'm going to share a little bit of the tools that were developed for this section. So I was one who led on this section, and lots of all of the tools that are shared here are things that I developed through practice in different kinds of universities. But before we begin sharing some of those tools, I just want to say that in our toolkit, we approach inclusion in two key kinds of ways. So obviously from an individual perspective, so an equity perspective, where actually the individual has what they need to be able to kind of navigate and thrive in whatever environment they're in, whether it's their curriculum or indeed in the world of work, but then also from a structural perspective. And this is why we have such a big focus on the curriculum. The curriculum is the most inclusive structure within the university environment for students who have numerous responsibilities, caring, financial and other responsibilities. It's probably the core curriculum actually that they engage with the most within their university experience, and therefore this is the structure that we really need to maximize to ensure that they have everything they need to be able to go off and succeed once they leave university. So really the Prepare section tools has a focus on this structural inclusion piece, how we can remove barriers within the curriculum and support students through kind of high impact pedagogies and assessments. So it can be inclusive by design. And so we developed some principles for embedding employability in the curriculum, then thinking about it from a teaching and learning perspective. So the first is, of course, you need to understand who your students are. And that's a really important piece. I used to do a session with academics called, level 4 transition. And I would have like a quiz where, really to understand whether academic colleagues knew the diverse mix of students they have in their classrooms, and what that then means for what we need to be thinking about in that curriculum design, teaching, learning process. So that's a key one there. A second principle is really around starting with the degree program and taking a programmatic approach to curriculum design if possible. And that's the kind of focus of this section as well, how we can try and do this, what are some of the processes we can use to enable this. And really thinking about what are the overarching goals of the program and how is this currently being achieved, and how can we kind of reach that goal more effectively. And therefore, designing the curriculum at that program level, thinking about the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors, the values, the experiences that we want students to gain through the process. So what's introduced in that first year of study, that's built upon in the second year, that's consolidated in the final year. If we think about the undergraduate student experience, but also how do we do that in a more condensed fashion when we think about a master's level program, for example. And then really using a range of pedagogies and assessments to achieve this. And I always say, actually, the simplest way of thinking about it is that to make a curriculum more inclusive, but also to develop a range of skills and capabilities, is to ensure that you have that diverse range of pedagogies and assessments within a degree program across each level of study and across the whole program itself. So not relying on those native pedagogies, so, essay-based assessments for humanities or lab-based assessments in the sciences, but really trying to increase the diversity of those within the program. And then incorporating the recruitability elements across the journey as well. And I guess when I talk about recruitability, it's really about those bits that we associate traditionally with careers and employability. So CV skills, interview skills, how do they feed into the core curriculum? Where do they fit in organically? And how can that be built in a structured way across a program? And then, of course, reviewing and evaluating on an annual basis, really thinking about what are our quality assurance processes that currently exist, how can they be enhanced to actually recognise this element as well. Ways of learning then, I just wanted to introduce, this is also one of the tools that's in the toolkit, because actually when we think about the curriculum as a whole, but also around how we want to embed employability into the curriculum, we can think about different ways of learning and the different types of activities maybe we may want to include. So the first is really around learning about. So for example, standalone in curricular workshops, for example, on presentation skills, team working, leadership. Now these often already happen and often kind of with professional services colleagues, such as those in careers, are brought in to deliver those sessions. It's a more passive form of learning, more surface level knowledge is gained through this process, but really valuable for things like assessment preparation. So, you know, there may be a group work assessment. We know that students actually really struggle with group work assignments. They don't enjoy it often. And it's perhaps because they've just never been, it's never been shared with them how you do that successfully. So you could have a team working and conflict management workshop in advance of that assessment to support students to have a successful outcome, for example. So learning about. Then learning for, this is all through case studies, scenario working, perhaps even a little bit of research, a lot more active, allows students to practice that theoretical learning in, of course, a safer environment that's a bit more scaffolded and achieves deeper learning. And absolutely, I'm sure many programs already have this kind of elements in there. And you can build upon this further then through just doing those similar things in the learning for stage, but through a real world interaction. So this is, for example, delivering real world projects in the curriculum. It could be work related or work-based learning through the curriculum. It could be bringing external partners into the curriculum, a really active form of learning, again, around applying that theoretical learning to affect real world outcomes, and allows perhaps even those students who cannot do traditional forms of employability development, such as internships and placements, because of the diverse responsibilities that they're juggling. It allows them to kind of mimic the benefits of those as well in this space. So this is always the bit that I focus on, that learning through piece. How can we have some really high impact experiences with it at each level of study to support all students? Now, another tool that's in the prepare section of the toolkit is really around how we approach programmatic curriculum design, or we can also think about it as employability mapping. And this is a process that I developed through practice, working with academic teams when I would bring kind of program teams together. So core module leads together along with the program director, so the course leader, as well as a head of department, for example. And within 2 hours, we'd work through this process to help them really understand what it is they're trying to achieve. So we start with defining. So what are the knowledge, skills, behaviors, and experiences that we want graduates to leave with from the program? And for that program team to really come together and have a consistent understanding of this. We then map how those knowledge, skills, behaviors, and experiences are currently being developed through the existing curriculum. And then we move on to identify where the gaps may be and how we want to enhance that further through the use of those high impact pedagogies or assessments. Then develop an action plan with the support, for example, of PS colleagues within careers or other teams, so that we can actually take forward and enhance that curriculum together. And then think about how we then evaluate those changes through the existing quality assurance processes, such as module evaluations, for example. And this is a workshop that I ran where we can actually see this in real time, where, you know, I would have flip chart paper on the wall for every year of study each semester, and using different colored post-it notes, we'll be able to see, you know, where we do have high impact pedagogies, where we do have really different kinds of assessments, where we are doing recruitability elements, where we are bringing the external into the curriculum. And that really helps academic teams, then those course teams, to really understand, yeah, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is how we are kind of working on this together. I think so rarely do, especially in the UK context, so rarely do course teams have the chance to come together to design in this way. They often are really appreciative of it and energized by it as well. And what we can develop then is something like this, a visual, and this is a specific kind of visual, but I have alternatives as well that I've developed with academic teams, but where they can see what's offered in the extracurricular space. And this is a very general piece that, you know, that you could put loads of other things in this extracurricular environment, but really the bit that we're focused on is that in curricular piece. So they can see where they've got those skills workshops at each level of study, where they are putting in those recruitability elements, where they are bringing the external environment into the curriculum, but also kind of really delivering on high impact pedagogies, such as kind of problem-based learning, for example. And it helps them then be able to understand it themselves, but also then communicate it explicitly with students who may not recognize around the real kind of breadth and depth of capability development that's occurring within the core curriculum. Oh, so these are just some of the tools, folks, that are in the prepare section of the toolkit. I wanted to introduce a little bit of that, and I have been, as part of the QAA rollout, been doing workshops at different universities, where really helping both academic and careers educators to really think about how they can utilize these tools and work collaboratively together to enhance the curriculum further. And there's way more there. So just so there's lots more there. This is just a little bit of a taster on what you can engage with. And we wanted to kind of close up this kind of sharing of the toolkit with this question here, like having kind of listened to the context on why this work is important, on some of the ways that we can kind of think about this. If you had no limitations, what do you think your university should be doing to inclusively develop employability through the curriculum? So just like with the Mentimeter, you can go to slido.com and put in the number, or indeed use a mobile device with the QR code and start typing. Ooh, we've got a few people going, that's great. Micro internships available to all in the curriculum. Okay, really, really interesting. And many universities have tried to do something like that, and it's more around how you can make that scalable, right? So really interesting there. Making employability elements part of the assessment. And again, it'll be really interesting to understand whether you mean those recruitability elements or other elements that you're thinking about. Absolutely, live briefs. I'm a big fan of problem-based learning, live projects, so very much supportive of that. I agree. In many places, it can be very old-fashioned, the teaching and learning environment. And so it's really important, I think, that educational developers and careers professionals that are supporting academic colleagues can provide those alternative types of guidance around what can be done in a way that achieves those learning outcomes. Absolutely, making it explicit to students around what's happening. There's actually loads of great work already within the curriculum, and how we can just explicitly communicate that with students so they understand it is really important. I think reflection is a key piece. So even when you do a live brief, I always have three sorts of assessments associated with that. It would be like a group presentation, an individual written assessment, as well as a reflective piece, which is so important. And many universities have things like synoptic modules that really are focused on a reflective action there as well. Specific support for disabled students, absolutely. And this is where that equity piece comes in as well, right? This is where the individualized support needs are implemented, absolutely. AI, AR, and VR, I think is a really important point. And it's actually, as I've been doing these workshops around the country, it's something that I think has come up more and more. And it's definitely an area that I'm interested in, on how you do this inclusively through the curriculum. So we've got lots of things, and you can see at the top here, people are talking about modules, about the curriculum, about assessments, about projects, about employers and students. So I think there's a real piece. Absolutely. So actually, when we think about the approach that's been and the tools in the prepare section are designed, of course, we've set the context for students from underrepresented groups, but actually we can also think about international students in this context. In the UK context, it's highly challenging for international students to secure traditional kind of internships and placements, and therefore having this kind of more enhanced curriculum where they're doing kind of live projects with external partners really allows also international students to benefit from this, because they are also growing their networks and gaining real valuable experiences. So I think maybe I'll stop sharing for now, or Linda or Gemma, if you can let me know, shall we move on to the next bit for questions? I'm not sure what the time.
Yeah, I think it would make sense to move on now, Aranee. There are a couple of questions in the chat that we can come to while other people are putting in their questions into the chat, which would be really helpful. So the idea here today was to illustrate the toolkit, to give you a sense of what the toolkit's, why we developed the toolkit, what it's for, how it works, where it is, how you can engage with it, and what the opportunities are for you. So if you have specific questions, please do add them to the chat. There were a couple of questions, Aranee, that I might just pick out if I may, and Gemma, Aranee, and Gemma's already responded to one of these, which is Wendy asked, neurodiverse students may initially struggle with team working. Is there a resource in place for neurodiverse students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds?
So shall I start? So I think what I popped in the chat there is, I think it's a really good point, and we do have a tool in the toolkit in the deliver section around giving and receiving inclusive feedback. So this is a great example of when you are getting students to work together. Obviously, we want them to support each other with giving feedback to each other on those kinds of that kind of work, their working styles. But how do we do that? Support them to do that in an inclusive way. How do we encourage them to support them to do that in a way which supports the development of our students? And things that we talked before that came up on the Mentimeter earlier are things like confidence, for example. How do we enable that activity in a way that builds the confidence of our students? So I think that's something I would highlight, is maybe that would be particularly beneficial for those students to provide more support mechanisms around that activity.
Yeah, and so that's great. So Gemma's highlighted an actual tool in the toolkit, and we haven't got anything else very specific to this question. However, I always get asked this question whenever I do a workshop. So people speak to me about this. And first, we have to recognize, obviously, that neurodiversity, I mean, the concept of being neurodiverse is not one thing. It is very diverse, and not all neurodiverse people with neurodiverse kind of situations do struggle in this capacity. But for those that do or find it more challenging, there are ways to support them to be able to succeed in this space as well, but also working with the wider class to understand that you're always going to be working with people who may be very different from you. The reality is, when we go into the world of work, we won't always get along with everybody that we are working with. And so how do we navigate this environment? And then how do we also support neurodiverse students to be able to effectively manage this environment as well? And you can always, with group assessments, for example, include things like peer and self-assessment. And that's a really nice way of supporting them to engage with this team working environment and recognize that we all need to be contributing in different kinds of ways, and that we do all contribute in different kinds of ways. So obviously that's very kind of in depth, so we weren't able to kind of produce that, and I think there are probably different types of toolkits that can support from that perspective. But in this specific question around kind of team working or group work and neurodiverse students, I think there are ways to support neurodiverse students to really be successful in this space, but also to help all students in that environment to understand that we need to be respectful of one another. And that's why something like a workshop, a skills workshop to support that assessment, can be a really useful means of doing that as well.
I can just add something there, Aranee. In the evaluation that we conducted when the toolkit items were trialled at City, and I had the great pleasure of working with two University of London students as Code Student Research Fellows, and we compiled an evaluation. They were able to identify some ways in which students felt that the activities really did engage them. And also we had some suggestions there from students about how the activities and the toolkit items could be more inclusive. So that report is available, and there's feedback there on the system. And I think that's an important part. We're getting a lot of people kind of engaging here, we hope, with the toolkit, and we are really keen to get feedback and to identify how we can further develop the toolkit. So if you try out an item for the toolkit, please do give us some feedback on the evaluate section of the toolkit. Just give us some feedback, and ask your students to give feedback, and that will help us all to develop our practice.
And then shall I take the question that's just come in the chat there about embedding skills? So thanks for the question there. So the question there is one that's just come, the latest in the chat there around essentially supporting academics to do this work and incentivizing them to do it, and which institutions are doing it already. So with my integrating employability hat on, ICAS hat on, I can say that a lot of universities are doing what we would call graduate attribute projects. So this is where you identify very much, along the lines of what we've been talking about in this webinar, surfacing those skills from the curriculum and helping students and academics to feel more confident articulating the link between the knowledge that they're gaining in their discipline and the skills that they're gaining that relate to the real world. And lots of institutions are doing that. It's a real theme that I'm seeing from all of the conversations that I'm having with various universities around the UK. I'm not aware of anyone who's absolutely, you kind of said in the question there, who's got it right and resourcing models and things. I think there's lots of institutions are grappling with this, and they're trying to think about how do you have an institutional position on this, which then everyone commits to. But if you would like to follow up with me separately, I think we're going to have our contact details, aren't we, Linda, at the end there? So if Georgie, if you do want to follow up with me with my in my ICAS capacity, I'm happy to follow up with you to signpost. It could be interesting to hear what kind of university you work at, and maybe I could try and link you up with an institution that's similar to you, that might be kind of trying to do some of this work.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, which is, so the prepare section is exactly around the subject discipline. So this is not around employability modules, the prepare section. So I think you're very welcome to look at that area and see how then, even if you are a PS member of staff, how you can better support academics. The comment here says that academics are not interested for various reasons. And you're right, they're really stretched, those colleagues. They have so much on their plates, and often the university is telling them they have to embed everything into the curriculum. So it can feel really overwhelming from that perspective. And so part of it is kind of making connections. So it's why, for example, when I do this work, I always link it to inclusive teaching and learning or inclusive curriculum, because that is a core priority for many universities. You can also link it to things like sustainability, mental health and well-being, because you're supporting kind of resilience, development of resilience, that kind of navigating ambiguity piece through the types of activities that you're suggesting. You can link it to kind of real world projects around sustainability as well moving forward. So there's a little bit there which is around how we can join up the dots for academic colleagues so that they don't feel like this is just so much being thrown at them. And when I do the workshops, and my specialism is in inclusive curriculum design for student and graduate outcomes, and when I do the workshops with academic colleagues, they really like how we're thinking about everything together. And I think that's the bit that really is important. And when I do the session with careers services, I always say, let's think of it from the academic colleagues' perspective. What are the challenges they're facing, and how can we then connect the work that we're trying to do to support them achieve their priorities as well? And Gemma, actually, when we did the launch back at Senate House in April of this year, we did also speak about how you can connect this work to both to the academic colleagues themselves, their career progression, by thinking about academic promotion criteria, as well as things like advanced HE fellowship, which many academic colleagues want to secure to be able to progress in their own careers as well. So I think there's so much that can be done if we choose to work, collaboratively, but we do need to join up the dots a little bit, because HE and universities are so great at creating those little silos and throwing everything at everyone at the same time. But how can we think about it a little bit more holistically, I would say.
And if I can do a quick plug on that subject, so ADCAS actually, we've just launched some academic employability awards. So if you're listening to this thinking that you've got, maybe you're academic yourself, or you've got academic colleagues that are doing great work in this space, please do encourage them to enter. As long as your institution is a member of ADCAS, you are eligible to enter. And we really do want to try and surface and join up these dots, as Aranee is saying, about the great work that's happening, and create those kind of reward incentives and that visibility for the great work that's happening. So there's a plug for that if anyone's interested.
Gemma, do you just want to say what ADCAS is for those?
Oh, sorry, yes. ADCAS is the Association of Graduate Careers Advisory Services, and it's the professional body in the UK for higher education career services. So it's acronyms. We all love an acronym, don't we?
And PS, which Aranee mentioned, is professional services staff. So we're all educators, but I guess we would be thinking of non-academic educators in that group. Brilliant. Okay. Were there any more comments or questions before we close?
There was a quick question in the chat from earlier. I don't think we've covered, which is what is capability approach? I don't know, Aranee, I think this was in one of your slides. Oh, you're on mute, Aranee.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, because I'm sharing, I can't see anything on my screen. Okay, so yeah, so when I talk about there are different ways of thinking about being inclusive, and I say being inclusive by design, and when I talk about that, I think of three underpinning kind of philosophies, and that's universal design, and I actually look at universal design from the more architectural concept of actually every user being able to use it. Then around culturally responsive practice, so really thinking about the huge cultural diversity within our educational settings and how we ensure our curricula is recognizing this and enabling them to be able to actively engage and benefit. And then I draw upon the capability approach, which is kind of developed by Amartya Sen, and my actual research background is in kind of international development, and he is from that background, which is around how do we support the most marginalized within our communities to develop the capabilities to thrive, by removing structural barriers basically as well. So it's just an underpinning philosophy, and you're welcome to kind of look it up and in relation to Amartya Sen and see how that can impact. And in the space of design as well, the capability approach is utilized a lot to think about how we just make design more inclusive. So as a really summary of that, but there's lots available for you to read in that area.
Thanks, Aranee. I think we're going to just come to the close. Whoever was sharing the slides, if you wouldn't mind just putting that back on for a moment, because we had details about the. Thanks, Aranee. We've got there in the slides, and I've put into the chat our details, so you can contact us. But also. Which is great. Thank you very much. Also, just a quick flag for our next Code Centre for Online and Distance Education webinar, from spark to flame, learning design from an evidence base. And I think this is a really important aspect of thinking about how do we use evidence research and scholarship to really move forward our practice, whether that's in careers education or in this case in learning design. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure to have this interaction with you. Lovely to see lots of people here. Appreciated you joining us, and thank you for your time. And a very big thank you from me to Aranee and Gemma, and to Matt in the background, because it's been a technically quite successful webinar, which is great. Thank you very much.